My parents ignored my birthday every year, but when my sister turned 18, they gave her the family cottage. So I went no contact, and their meltdown was unbelievable. By the time I turned 15, I stopped pretending to expect cake. I didn't wait by the phone for calls that wouldn't come or sit at the breakfast table hoping someone remembered what day it was. I learned early that birthdays were something other people had, other families, kids in sitcoms, Hallmark commercials, even my cousins. But not me. In our house, you didn't get celebrated just for existing. At least, not if you were me. The first time I truly noticed it, I must have been around 7. I came downstairs in a paper crown I'd made myself at school, hoping, stupidly, that it might spark something in my mom's memory. She was at the stove, scraping scrambled eggs out of a pan like she was fighting with it, and my dad sat silently at the table, reading a newspaper like he did every morning, back when people still did that. I said, clear as I could, "Today's my birthday." My mom blinked like I'd said something in another language, then said, "Well, eat your eggs before they get cold." That was it. No hug. No, oh my God, I almost forgot. Not even a fake smile. Just cold eggs and a colder silence. It didn't stop me from hoping the next year or the year after. I think kids have this natural, stubborn optimism that just refuses to die even when it gets kicked in the face repeatedly. I held on until I couldn't anymore. By the time I hit double digits, I stopped telling anyone when my birthday was. It was too humiliating to remind your own family and worse to be disappointed all over again. So I pretended I didn't care. I told friends at school it was just another day, joked about how I didn't like cake, and said I didn't need presents because I had everything I needed. What a crock. I would have killed for someone to hand me a wrapped gift, any gift, even a dollar store trinket with the wrong name spelled on the tag. I wanted a banner. I wanted someone to bake me a damn cake, even one of those dry, store-brand ones with a weird pink frosting that tastes like chemicals and regret. But what I got was silence. Every single year. Like clockwork. Meanwhile, my parents were not abusive in the traditional sense. That's important to say. They weren't monsters. They didn't hit us. They didn't scream. We had clothes and food and a roof. To any outsider, we looked like the typical middle-class family from Michigan. My mom even brought store-bought cookies to PTA meetings, and my dad once ran the grill at the church picnic like some kind of suburban war hero. But inside that house, there was a hierarchy, and I was very clearly not at the top of it. Enter my little sister, Jessica. Jessica was born when I was 9, and it was like the sky opened up and angels descended. At least, that's how my parents acted. Suddenly, there were balloons and cakes and cameras. I'd never seen so many photos taken in my life. Her first birthday was an event. Not a party, an event. Dozens of people crammed into our backyard, a clown that made balloon swords, a whole catered table with food that didn't even belong on paper plates. I stood in the corner, clutching a cupcake someone handed me like it was a bone tossed to a stray dog. I remember asking my dad that day, did I have a party like this when I was 1? And he looked confused for a second before he said, probably. Don't remember. That probably sat with me like a nail in my chest because I remember. I remember all the years with nothing. No balloons. No candles. Just my mom saying, oh, right. It's your birthday, as if I'd scheduled it to be inconvenient. I learned to shrink myself around Jessica. Not because she was mean, she wasn't. She was a kid. She didn't ask to be the favorite, and in her way, I think she tried to include me sometimes. But she grew up knowing she was wanted, and I grew up knowing I was tolerated. The worst part? I started blaming myself. That's the trick of that kind of quiet, emotional neglect. It makes you think maybe you're just not lovable. Maybe there's something wrong with you that keeps people from celebrating your existence. So you become the overachiever, the helper, the peacekeeper. I did everything I could to earn their attention. I got good grades, did the chores before they asked, kept Jessica entertained so they could have their wine and their silence, and still nothing. By the time I was in high school, I stopped even pretending. I'd get myself a cupcake from the gas station, stick a lighter in it instead of a candle, and blow it out in the parking lot behind the library. That was my celebration. I told myself it was fine, that I was independent, that I didn't need anyone. But deep down, I still wanted my mother to look at me like I was something more than background noise. I can remember one specific birthday, my 16th, where I finally cracked. They didn't say a word all day. I waited, silently begging in my head for one of them to slip up and say happy birthday even by accident. Nothing. Jessica gave me a high five in the hallway and said, I think today is your birthday. Right? Like, she wasn't sure. That night, I sat on the porch and cried until my face was numb. Then I wiped my tears, went back inside, and did the dishes. But here's the thing. That kind of neglect doesn't kill you, it hardens you. It turns your emotions into steel, your memories into fuel. I stopped crying. I started planning. Not consciously, not at first. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't the kind of wound that healed. It was the kind that changed you. And then came the year my sister turned 12, and I realized I was invisible. Jessica's 12th birthday was when everything really shifted, not in the quiet, passive way things had been shifting for years, but in a sharp, visible, brutal way, like someone finally said out loud what I'd been feeling since the day she was born. My parents threw her a birthday party, of course, that was now standard protocol. I helped string up decorations in the garage, sliced watermelon in the kitchen while my mom ordered a themed cake, and kept a smile on my face that felt like holding in a scream with your teeth. The theme that year was horses. Not the cartoon kind. Actual horses. She got riding lessons booked for the summer, posters of champion thoroughbreds, even a promise of her own horse when she turned 16 from some connection my dad had made through work. I was 21 by then, and I stood off to the side, pretending to enjoy the music and the hot dogs while listening to adults repeat the same line over and over again like it was rehearsed. There she is, the princess of the house, the princess of the house, someone else would echo, ruffling her hair or giving her a hug like she'd just accomplished something extraordinary. And she'd grin like any 12-year-old would, soaking it in, not understanding the quiet implication that someone else in that house, someone standing 5 feet away, holding a platter of potato salad, had never once been called anything so fond. I was the older sibling. I was the one who knew how to unclog the bathroom sink and vacuum out the lint trap in the dryer and check the oil in my dad's car. But no one ever called me the princess, because girls don't get to be special just for existing, right? Not unless you're the right girl. The chosen one. Jessica was their little princess, and I was just help. I remember hearing my aunt say, "Jessica's really growing up. I bet she's such good company for her mom now that dad's so busy," and my mother actually beamed like it was true. Like I hadn't been the one who cooked half the meals the year she got pneumonia. Like I hadn't walked Jessica home from school every day for 3 years because they worked late. I was the background character in their family movie. Necessary, sure, but not worth mentioning. It didn't end with birthdays, of course. That was just the surface. By the time Jessica was in middle school, they treated her like a tiny queen. They bought her first real bike when she turned 13, not a hand-me-down, not something second-hand from a garage sale, but a brand new, purple mountain bike with shocks and gears and a water bottle holder like she was training for the Olympics. I'd had a pink Huffy I found in the neighbor's trash and fixed up myself when I was 13. No one even noticed. I think I still had to pump the tires with a borrowed pump from the gas station for the first 2 months. But they noticed Jessica. They noticed everything she did. When she got a B+ in pre-algebra, there were high fives and pizza night. When I got straight A's, my mother once said, "That's good. But don't let it go to your head." I never let it go anywhere. I filed it away like everything else. When Jessica turned 16, they bought her first car, a red 1992 Mustang. That would have made it, only 3 years old at the time. Almost new. I remember running my hand along the hood, feeling the heat of the engine from where they'd just driven it home and parked it in the driveway like it belonged there, like it had always belonged to her. My parents stood on either side of her, beaming like game show hosts. I was 25 by then, working 2 jobs and taking night classes to get my associate's degree. I took the bus to campus every day, rain or shine, even in the snow. Not once did they offer to help with a car. I asked once, quietly, during dinner when the topic of Jessica's driving lessons came up, and my dad said, "Well, you're pretty independent. You always figured things out on your own." That sentence felt like being slapped across the face with a compliment dipped in acid. Independent. The word they use when they're proud of not needing to give a damn about you. And I had figured it out. I took pride in it even, but I also hated them for making me need to. It was around this time that the calls started getting more frequent from my mother mostly. Checking in on Jessica. Asking if I could look after her since I was so responsible. If I could help her with her homework, if I could take her to the DMV. I was living in a cheap apartment above a garage, working late nights at a diner, still too poor for curtains, and they wanted me to be a chauffeur. Still, I did it. I said yes because saying no was still foreign to me. Because there was still this tiny bruised version of me inside, hoping if I was useful enough, they might see me. They might finally say, "Thank you." But all they ever said was "good job," and always when it was about Jessica. She got into a state college at 17, a good one. Not Ivy League, but respectable. You would have thought she'd cured cancer. They held a dinner. My dad gave a toast. My mom cried. I remember holding my glass of soda and watching them like I was in a dream or maybe a bad movie I couldn't pause. I'd already graduated. No party. No toast. Just a card that said, "Proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad." No money inside. Nothing. But nothing prepared me for what they gave her at 18. It happened in early June, right after Jessica's high school graduation, one of those thick, hot weekends where the air sticks to your skin and the smell of cut grass follows you everywhere like a lazy ghost. I had driven up to the house in my battered old Civic, one headlight flickering like a dying eye, and found the driveway full of unfamiliar cars, the front lawn dotted with folding chairs, and the sound of celebration already bleeding out through the walls. Jessica had just turned 18. I was 27. I had been working a double shift the night before, so I arrived late, still wearing mascara from yesterday and the kind of fatigue that doesn't wash off. Inside, everything was bright and loud, people laughing too hard, paper plates stacked with store-bought pasta salad, an acoustic cover of Sweet Child of Mine playing from a Bluetooth speaker like that made the event classy. My mother spotted me from the kitchen and waved like I was a guest who'd wandered into the wrong backyard. I gave her a nod and made my way through the crowd, stepping over a cooler and past some distant cousin holding a beer and talking about interest rates like he owned the economy. Jessica stood in the center of it all, grinning like a politician, arms around 2 of her friends, her cap still perched perfectly on her head like some kind of crown. I barely had time to put down my purse when my dad tapped a fork against his glass, calling everyone's attention like a man about to reveal a winning lottery ticket. "Everyone," he said, puffing his chest with theatrical pride, "we wanted to do something special for our daughter, something that honors all the hard work she's done and the woman she's becoming." I didn't even blink. I was used to these speeches, the ones that made Jessica out to be some kind of small-town messiah for passing pre-calc and not getting into trouble. "So," he continued, his voice tightening like he couldn't quite believe his own generosity, "we've decided to give her the family cottage. It's officially hers now." The words hit me so hard, I actually thought, for a second, that I'd misheard them. The family cottage. The cottage. That little weather-beaten place by the lake that had been part of our family for over 3 generations. The place where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, where I learned to swim and built fires and read paperbacks on the porch until the sun slid behind the trees. The cottage with the crooked dock and the green metal canoe and the kitchen that always smelled like wood and coffee grounds. That cottage. The room erupted in applause, the kind of soft, drunken clapping people give when they're not really sure what else to do. Jessica beamed and said, "No way, are you serious?" Like she hadn't known, like this was some huge surprise, but I saw the flicker of smugness in her eyes. She knew. Of course she knew. My parents don't do spontaneous. That deed had probably been signed and sealed weeks ago. I stood there, trying to remember how to breathe. No one looked at me. No one thought to look at me. Not even for a second. It was like I wasn't there, like I'd never existed inside those cottage walls, never curled up on the screened-in porch during thunderstorms, never helped repaint the fence when I was 15, sweating under the July sun while Jessica splashed in the water with her friends. I remembered fixing the broken shutter the summer after college, staying an extra week to help my dad replace the rotted trim, even though I had finals coming. I remembered cleaning out the attic one miserable weekend when my parents thought about selling it, crawling through dust and spider webs just in case they wanted to declutter. All those memories, all those hours, all that quiet love I'd poured into that place without ever being asked, and now it was hers. Like I was some family friend hearing the news for the first time. I waited, half expecting someone, anyone, to pull me aside and say, "Hey, we're giving it to her on paper, but it's still for both of you." Or, "You'll share it, of course." Or, even a simple, "We know it means a lot to you." But nothing came. Not a glance. Not a nod. My mom smiled at Jessica like she'd just been knighted by the queen. So I left the living room. I walked out onto the porch, past the hanging fern I bought for them 2 summers ago, and I stood there staring at the road, waiting for my legs to stop shaking. Something broke in me that day. Not dramatically. Not like glass. It was quieter than that, deeper, like a rope snapping deep underwater, something you don't hear until the tension's already gone and you're drifting. That night, I sat in my car for over an hour before I drove home. I didn't turn on the engine. I just sat there, staring out the windshield, the engine ticking, the world dimming around me. There was no scene. No yelling. No confrontation. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing my face crumple, of giving them anything real. What they took from me that day wasn't just a building. It was the final nail in a coffin they'd been building my whole life. The cottage wasn't just a house on a lake. It was the last piece of proof that I'd mattered at all. And they handed it to someone else like it was a damn party favor. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I knew exactly what I was going to do next. It's funny how silence can be louder than screaming, how choosing not to say a single word sometimes cuts deeper than a whole argument full of raised voices and slammed doors. I didn't storm out after the party. I didn't make a speech or throw a drink or call anyone out by name. I hugged my mother with a stiff smile and said, "Congratulations again," like I was just another guest, like none of it mattered, and then I got into my car and drove home like my hands were being held together by wire. That drive was long and quiet and thick with the kind of clarity that only comes when your heart finally hits empty and stops trying. The next morning, before the sun even came up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone for what must have been an hour before I started deleting numbers. One by one, I erased them. My parents' landline, my dad's cell, my mom's work number, Jessica's contact saved under a stupid nickname from years ago. I blocked them all before I could think twice. I deleted old voicemails too. There weren't many, but each one felt like a rock in my shoe, just enough to make walking forward impossible. The last one from my mom was from months ago, asking if I could take Jessica's graduation photos since you're good with that artsy stuff. I wasn't invited to the official shoot they paid for, by the way. That had been a professional photographer, but I guess they thought I'd be a nice backup. I changed my number by the afternoon. I walked into a tiny cell phone kiosk at the mall, told the guy behind the counter I needed a fresh start, and he didn't ask a single question. Just nodded and got to work. I think I tipped him $10 just for not making me explain myself. Then I called the bank, the post office, my boss, and a few friends who'd probably think I was being dramatic, but I didn't care. This wasn't about anyone else. This was about severing the cord that had been wrapped around my neck for nearly 3 decades. The cold cut, as I called it, clean, fast, final. But see, the thing about revenge, real, satisfying, grown-up revenge, is that it isn't loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or confessions or tearful breakdowns. It comes quietly, in paper trails and overlooked details and signatures written in long-forgotten corners of old documents. And that's where my story starts to twist. Years earlier, sometime around my 20th birthday, not that my parents noticed, I'd had a long conversation with my late grandfather's lawyer. Back then, I was helping sort through some of his paperwork after he passed away, and I'd stumbled across something strange in the files, a joint property arrangement involving the cottage. See, my grandfather had been the original owner before he passed it to my parents, and for some reason, maybe out of some unspoken guilt, maybe because I was the only grandkid who ever helped him with his taxes, he had listed me as a partial secondary title holder on the property, with the clause that I'd be added to the deed if I ever contributed financially to its upkeep. At the time, it had meant nothing. But later, when my parents started slacking on paying the property taxes, especially in those years when money got tight and my dad's job went through that weird downsizing period, I quietly stepped in. I paid the bills directly through the county website using my name, my bank info, and my own mailing address. Nobody asked questions because, honestly, the government doesn't care who pays as long as it gets paid. I never told them. Never brought it up. It was just easier to take care of it than to deal with their excuses. But what that meant legally was that I had skin in the game. And now after the big dramatic gift they gave Jessica, after the crowd clapped and the champagne corks popped and the fake smiles were exchanged, my name was still on the books. Technically, I wasn't a co-owner yet, but I was what they call an equitable stakeholder. It was the kind of boring legal detail people overlook when they're too busy patting themselves on the back for screwing someone over. So I called the same lawyer again, told him the whole story. I kept it dry and emotionless. Just facts. He didn't say much, just asked for a few documents and told me he'd make some calls. A few weeks later, I got a very polite letter in the mail confirming that, yes, based on the payment history and my grandfather's original intent, I had every right to file for partial ownership, and that if the property were ever to be sold or refinanced, my signature would be required. I didn't go shouting it from the rooftops. I didn't post about it online or text Jessica some smug message. I just waited. I knew they'd try something, they always did. And sure enough, 2 months later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I didn't answer, of course, but they left a voicemail. It was my dad's voice, tight and pissed and full of the usual forced calm that never fooled anyone. Hey, we're in the process of transferring some paperwork on the Lake Place, and there seems to be some confusion with the county records. If you could give us a call back, that'd be great. I didn't. I let the silence hang in the air like smoke from a bridge still burning in the distance. The next voicemail came a week later, this time from Jessica, sounding more confused than angry. Hey, I guess your name is still tied to the property somehow? I'm not really sure what's going on, but it's kind of holding things up. Can we talk? We didn't talk. Instead, I emailed the lawyer and told him to confirm everything in writing and to notify the county that I had no intention of signing anything. Not now. Not ever. I didn't want to sell. I didn't want to transfer ownership. I wanted that place to sit right where it was, like a knife in their side, a reminder that they couldn't erase me just because it was easier. They had handed my childhood memories to someone else, but I still held the keys to the lock they'd forgotten existed. And when they tried to sell it, guess who had to sign? The first voicemail came on a Sunday morning, right around the time the neighborhood was mowing their lawns and dragging garbage bins to the curb, as if the world was still functioning like nothing had burned. I had just finished making coffee, the old kind with a metal French press and a chipped ceramic mug I bought at a flea market, when my phone buzzed on the counter with a number I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a moment, letting it ring, letting the tension coil itself around my stomach like barbed wire, then let it go to voicemail without a single ounce of guilt. The message was my mother's voice, not yelling, not begging, but tight, clipped, the sound of a woman who was trying very hard to pretend she wasn't unraveling. I don't know what you're doing, she said, with that half whisper she always used when she wanted to sound like a victim, but this is causing a lot of confusion, and people are asking questions. We need to talk, okay? This isn't how family handles things. I laughed out loud when I heard it, that last part especially. This isn't how family handles things. The same people who had forgotten my birthday every year like it was some meaningless holiday, who gave away the one place in the world I ever felt truly rooted without a second thought, were now going to lecture me about family. That message was followed by 2 more, both from my dad, both angrier. The first one asked me to be reasonable. The second one just said, "You're embarrassing us," as if I had created this mess. As if decades of erasure and polite cruelty were nothing compared to the horror of them being inconvenienced. A few days later, Jessica finally broke the silence. She sent a text that started with my name, always a bad sign, and then went on to say, "I know you think you're making a point, but this is bigger than just you. We've got plans for the cottage. You've ruined everything." I read it 3 times. No apology. No question. Just that flat, accusatory tone that said everything I needed to know about what kind of woman she was becoming. I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't, but because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't set the whole forest on fire. That week, I started hearing things, not directly, of course, but through the quiet grapevine that every small community builds without realizing. Friends from high school messaged me out of nowhere, pretending they were just checking in, but I could tell by the way their sentences curled at the end that they were trying to get the story. One even said, "I heard something weird about the cottage. Did you really block your whole family over that?" As if the property was the only thing at stake. I didn't correct her. Let them wonder. Let them build their own versions of me in their heads, twist the facts into whatever shape made them feel better. I was done explaining. I didn't go to Thanksgiving that year. I didn't send cards. I didn't return voicemails, even when they came with guilt-tripping half-confessions like, "We didn't mean to hurt you," or "It's just that Jessica needed it more." My absence became the scandal. My name became the ghost of the table. Eventually, I stopped hearing from most of them altogether. The silence that had once felt like punishment now settled into a kind of peace, a sharp, stinging peace, like cold air in your lungs after a fire. I had cut the cord, and there was no going back. Some nights, I still dreamed about the cottage, not as it was, but how it used to be. The dock creaking under my bare feet. The smell of lake water and sunscreen. The sound of loons calling in the early morning while the fog sat low over the trees. In those dreams, I'm always a little girl again, swinging my legs off the edge of the deck, waiting for someone to come outside and notice me. But they never do. The door stays closed. The lights stay off. I always wake up just before I knock. Months passed, and the call stopped. The lawyers handled the rest. My name stayed on the title. Jessica couldn't sell it. They tried to find a workaround, some quiet transfer, some loophole, but the paperwork held. Every time they tried to move forward, they hit my name like a wall, and I never had to lift a finger again. One night, almost a year later, I found myself sitting alone on the beach near my apartment. It was windy, cold enough that I had to wrap my arms around myself to keep from shivering, but I didn't mind. There was something about the sound of waves that always reminded me of who I really was underneath the noise. I stared out at the black water, let the salt air settle into my bones, and wondered, just for a moment, if any of it had been worth it. Not the silence, not the revenge, but the loss. The permanent choice I'd made to walk away and never come back. It had freed me, sure, but it had also hollowed me out in places I couldn't quite refill. When I got home, I opened the bottom drawer of my old wooden dresser, the one I never used for clothes, and pulled out a letter I hadn't touched in over 10 years. It was sealed in a plain white envelope, yellowed at the corners, addressed in my father's handwriting. I had found it tucked inside a box of old tax records years ago, long before the cottage mess, long before any of this had started to fully rot. The date on the envelope was just after my 16th birthday, the one they forgot, like all the others. I'd kept it all this time without ever opening it. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I didn't want to know if it was full of apologies or more excuses. Maybe I couldn't handle knowing that they had once tried to reach me, and I just wasn't ready to hear it. I held it in my hand for a long time that night, staring at the name he'd written, my name, in blocky, uneven letters that looked like he'd been nervous when he wrote them. My fingers curled under the flap, and I hesitated. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to carry any more pieces of them with me. Not even their regret. Sometimes the dead reach out, but I'm not sure if I want to know what he had to say.